After the bombs fell, those lucky enough to have survived the initial fallout attempted to move on and find their own place in a now broken world. As the leaders amongst men went out into the Capital Wasteland, they constructed settlements, farms, and general locations of safe haven for those that chose to reside within the parameters of their claimed land. Over time, the people of the wasteland moved on with their new normal way of life, where they worked to grow and live in a dangerous world. One group constructed a settlement upon an old aircraft carrier. Another even built a town around an undetonated nuclear bomb. But there is one more that has its own interesting story. Where is this settlement located? Who resides there? And what history does it have? Here we explore in the lore behind the Republic of Dave. As the vaults opened across the wasteland, one by one, the residents of a now named Capital Wasteland traversed a dangerous land inhabited by the once peaceful creatures turned dangerous monsters that had been subjected to the brutal aftermath of a nuclear fallout. As these groups travelled the Capital Wasteland, one ventured to the northeast, and here they claimed a small plot of land. Now with no known government to rule over the once great United States of America, the people here came up with their own government and declared this land as theirs and as a sovereign state separate from the rest of the Capital Wasteland. Selecting their own representative, each leader sworn in would guide the small population within the barriers. Alongside this, the leader would also have the ability to rename this place, as well as select the rules and form of government the community would live by. With their view of this location being a sovereign state existing within the Capital Wasteland, but not a part of it, the people here would grow weary of any outsiders. Looking back at the earliest known names of this land, the first documented name is stated to be the Kingdom of Larry. After this, the kingdom adapted its name into the Republic of Stevie Ray. That was after Stevie Ray took control. At the end of their term, Bill became the leader of the land, and he named the location Bill Sylvania. After this, Stevie Ray returned and named it the New Republic of Stevie Ray, and then Tom was born. As he grew up in the New Republic, he became favourable amongst his peers, and when it was time to choose a new leader, Tom took over, naming the sovereign state the Kingdom of Tom, declaring himself as King Tom. With Tom in charge, he had at least one known child, Dave, as each leader had their own set of rules on how the kingdom would function. Some of those below him began to disapprove of his methods. Perfectly suited to be a farming settlement, this community could mostly care for themselves with ease, and for the items they could not acquire themselves, they were lucky enough to be a regular stopping point for the traders that wandered the wasteland. Separate from the other nations of Earth, the Kingdom of Tom traded and interacted with those that did come to the kingdom. Similar to the other states across the world before the fall, the kingdom even had a tourism office in the event an ambassador of the wasteland were to come to the kingdom. Here, they put in place opportunities for those that visited. If requested, those passing through could visit here on a holiday, become a refugee from the harsh realities of the wasteland, of course for a fee, or even request to become a citizen. With these opportunities, it allowed the Kingdom of Tom to interact with the other nations around them and grow an economy. With this power structure falling under a monarchy, the leadership of this kingdom would fall naturally through the bloodline, and that meant that one day, Tom's son Dave would take over as his birthright. One day, Dave was exiled from the Kingdom of Tom after he broke the rules. With this, Dave had the opportunity to explore the marvelous but dangerous Capital Wasteland. only aware of the world from the teachings of Tom and the little that the traders told the residents of the kingdom, Dave learned as much about the world as he could. During his time out in the Capital Wasteland, Dave survived the many dangers it threw at him, and after each confrontation with not only the creatures of the wasteland, but also its ruthless human inhabitants, he trained his abilities in combat and became a mercenary to earn caps to survive. Over time, Dave became known as one of the deadliest and most trustworthy mercenaries in the business. With this, he gained the attention of Alistair Tenpenny at 27 years of age in 2257. Alongside 4 other mercenaries, Mr. Crowley, Dukov, Jeff Strayer and Tara Fields, he was hired to acquire a rare weapon in Fort Constantine, which upon completion left each of these mercenaries a key to the location where other weapons and armor lay, waiting to be salvaged. The only issue with this was that all of the keys had to be used together to enter the location. After a mostly prosperous mission and with being successful in surviving the savage wasteland, Dave began to miss his home and would return shortly after. Upon returning to the kingdom of Tom, Dave came back with revolution in mind. One by one, he took advantage of those that disapproved of his father's actions. For each supporter Tom lost, Dave gained, and slowly but surely, Dave was eventually given the role of leader of the kingdom of Tom as his father lost favor. And now, he had some changes to make. With their new leader ready to claim his state, Dave renamed the sovereign state to the Republic of Dave. Here, he married and began his own legacy, having his first son, Bob, shortly after. While the structure of the other leaders' rulings is unknown, over the next 20 years, Dave created a strong, close-knit community that stayed clear of and questioned the motives of any outsider. By 2277, the Republic of Dave was home to 9 residents, each of them related in some aspect to one another. With the land having a large building, it had been chosen to be the Capitol building, where the decisions regarding the Republic were made. Although the land itself was small, the people here still had a grand vision and pride for their state. This Capitol building, in comparison to the original that had fallen during the Great War, was a far cry from its namesake, but this one was actually functional, while the other was not. Here, Dave created a brief constitution of rules for the Republic of Dave in which men could have more than one wife, a law he had changed from his father's time of leadership after finding it restrictive. A deep hatred for communism in which any discovered to follow this ideology would be killed on sight, and if those visiting or living within the Republic chose not to call Dave by his governmental title, they could also be executed, his correct title being President Dave. With Dave as the ruler, his wives, Rosie and Jessica, helped raise the children. As the First Lady of the Republic of Dave, Rosie had ideas on how to improve the Republic, having been in charge of her own group back in the Wasteland before coming to the Republic of Dave. But with Dave having fought for his position of power, he would occasionally shut her down, unaware of just how intelligent she was. Respectful to not only her husband but also her leader, she would then continue to support her husband, believing him to truly be capable of the job he had. Although they shared a marriage to the same man, the relationship between the wives was shown to be tough. The second and younger wife, Jessica, had been born into the Republic, and with never having stepped foot outside of its borders, she saw herself as better than Rosie, thinking extremely highly of herself. As a much younger wife of Dave, she believed she could do things that Rosie could not do, and truly believed that Dave could bring back civilization to the Wasteland. Although she did not see value in Rosie being within the Republic of Dave, Rosie had given Dave 6 children who would, as they grew up, take on a greater responsibility in the state. With many children in the Republic, Dave repurposed the buildings and turned one into a home for the girls and another for the boys, keeping them separated. Interestingly enough, within the girls' quarters, they had an oven, cooking preparation space, and a fridge. This suggesting their role to be to cater to the men of the Republic of Dave. As Dave, having seen the dangers of the wasteland during his exile, understood that one day these dangers may discover the Republic. Using his knowledge, he trained his wives and his children in the skills he had learned over the years in survival techniques and how to handle weaponry in the event that the dangers of the wasteland would discover the Republic of Dave one day. With this, he raised his son, Bob, to take up the role of second commander of the army of Dave, understandably under his father, who acted as the first commander. Believing this to be the greatest army in the wasteland, at the young age of 19, Bob grew his ego extremely quickly with such responsibility. His views of himself left him believing that his decisions were always correct, and that no one other than his father would have the potential to disagree with them. From around the state, his peers also began to discover that at points he showed dictatorship tendencies, something they would view as a negative to the running of a nation. In spite of this, Bob believed it to be his birthright to run the Republic of Dave after his father gave up the power. On his daily schedule, Bob wandered the state, fixing any issues he came across. Although trained in combat skills by his father and being second in command of the Republic's army, he worked only with a limited arsenal consisting of assault rifles and 10mm pistols, limited weaponry, but weapons that could cause damage if needed, if the Republic were to be attacked. In the open, Bob followed his father's orders with ease, but behind closed doors, it was believed that Bob absolutely hated his father and sought out a way to take him out of the picture, similar to what his father had done to his grandfather, Tom. At 17, Shauna had grown up in the same environment as her older brother, but she used her talents in order to survive any situation the Republic would fall in. Having been taught to shoot using the Republic's shooting range, fight for the cause of the Republic, and hunt for food, Shauna had grown into a vital member of the Republic of Dave. As Dave's firstborn daughter, and with all of the survival traits he had taught her, Shauna truly believed in everything her father stated about the outside world, and would in turn spread the word and teachings of Dave to her younger siblings within the Museum of Dave. With Dave running the Republic, Rosie and Jessica attempting to be seen as the best wives, and Bob and Shauna having grown into their roles of a smoothly running sovereign state, the state appeared to grow on their small plot of land in the Capital Wasteland. From within the Capitol building, Dave spoke of plans to eventually expand their borders and bring in every member of the Wasteland into the Republic of Dave, where they could all admire him as their president. As for the younger children of the Republic of Dave, Mary, Rachel, Ralph and Flower, they were, like a normal society before the fall, sent to school to learn about the world and the great state. Alongside her duties, Shauna also looked after the Museum of Dave, where she curated and placed items within that her father had given to her with a grand story of each item's acquisition. Within this museum, which also acted as a classroom, Shauna would teach the children and visitors of the Great Republic of Dave and its history. Scattered along the walls of this small building, the Museum of Dave held many mementos of the history of this state, but although the stories that came with these historical artifacts would make those hearing the stories look upon President Dave and his republic with awe, It is to be noted that many of the stories told here were simply not true, or at least extremely exaggerated. These stories are, in fact, just another way to indoctrinate the children and visitors of the Republic into his misguided views of the world and his beliefs. From his teachings, Shauna taught the children that the Republic of Dave was the only true sovereign state in the Wasteland, and thus the only civilized place left in the world. Even with this fact, the children would grow up to believe the Wasteland to be uncivilized without culture and a place to be pitied that was just waiting to be saved by the potential expansion of the Republic of Dave. For those that would visit the Museum of Dave tour, they would be told that even as a baby, Dave never cried and even his poop did not stink, a lie, showing Dave in almost a deity-like image. Moving on to Dave as a child, Shauna explained that Dave had 8 siblings and even made their own baseball team, but where those siblings are now is unknown. Because of how naturally talented this baseball team was, the whole of the Capital Wasteland was too scared to play them, and so no one came to compete against them. Whether these siblings were made up for this story or whether they left the Republic is truly unknown, but like all of the other stories told in this museum, it is likely to be that they never existed at all. Moving on to his adolescence, Shauna teaches that Dave became tired of his father's running of the state and left upon his own free will. On his journey, he explored the entire planet on foot, even walking to China at one point. Through this demonstration of Dave's traversal of the planet, Shauna explains that he picked up holotapes and war weaponry. In this great place of learning, the children are taught that the planet is at least 50 times bigger than an antique globe on show. This fact just as accurate as the stories told of their great leader. As the children learned of his ability to explore and acquire valuable artifacts to increase the wealth of the sovereign state, they also learned of his abilities in combat. They learned that he was a world-renowned marksman, known for even surviving an encounter with a deathclaw, where he even managed to bring back its head to mount its skull within the museum. While this would appear to be an impressive feat in itself, it would also seem that this skull, in reality, was a Brahmin skull, a non-hostile, simple creature that this farm even owned a few of. As with the nature of this location, the information supplied to the museum appeared to be supplied by Dave himself, where his completely oblivious daughter would then spread it out to the children of the Republic as truth. As expected, the children here would grow up to view their president as an all-powerful leader, a man that could do no wrong. Although Bob despised his father, Dave's wives and children all believed in him and his rulings to the point where even when an election came up, no one else ran, leaving Dave the president by default. Having been taught about his greatness since birth and fearful of his wrath, Dave and his family appeared to show similarities to a modern-day cult, a leader that could do no wrong, the people surrounding him believing everything he said, teachings of his greatness in school, and with nobody to openly oppose his ruling, he simply continued to rule over the Republic, where he scheduled each activity and minute of those that resided there in complete control without them being aware of it, using his role of the commander of the Bureau of Dave-like activities to keep them in line. For his children, as they were allowed playtime, they were taught to play a game called Republic. In this game, they would take turns playing as Dave and the various other archetypes they had been taught wandered the wasteland. During these games, the best role to play as was Dave, and they could action the execution of those that came upon the Republic. This game taught them the ultimate power of life and death, a reinforcement in belief of their all-powerful leader, and it also gave an insight into how each of these children would one day act if they were to take over Dave as the leader. Alongside their respect for their father and leader, the people of the Republic were told to refer to Dave only in his elected title, where the children would call him President Daddy, and the older would name him Mr. President, amongst other titles. If not named in the manner he deemed necessary, those unable to follow this simple rule would either be executed or ordered to leave the state. The culture of this republic would appear to those from the outside to be that of a cult, with those below Dave having been brainwashed by his astounding stories and beliefs about the wasteland that needed saving and soon would be saved by the Republic of Dave. But these outside influences did exist and would become a challenge for Dave to manage as time went on. As the Capital Wasteland continued to grow with more and more vaults opening across it, the Republic of Dave grew too, not in size, but in economy. As the traders passed their state, they traded in essentials with the running of the Republic. Although these traders allowed the running and economy of the Republic to thrive, they also posed a threat to the way of life within. As Dave had taught everyone his own version of the Capital Wasteland, he worried that any interaction with those not a part of the Republic could get in the way of his teachings. With this, he limited the interaction of any outsider to the point where his state would direct any who did ask questions to speak to Dave directly instead of those he ruled over. This benefited him in two ways. He could control the information his constituents knew of the wasteland, and also, it helped him control his paranoia of spies infiltrating the Republic and finding out all of his secrets. At the gates, Bob wandered the border with his gun, watching for any outsider sightings, while the rest of the community took turns guarding the gate. Aside from the traders that did visit from time to time, residents of the wasteland also came to the Republic of Dave, some simply seeking to find out who lived on this land, while others came for community. As the leader of this great republic, President Dave also governed over the Immigration Bureau and the Tourism Office. For those seeking asylum, citizenship, or even a holiday, Dave would use his position in the Immigration Bureau to get as many caps out of the visitors as possible. With no one wanting to speak to any outsider without Dave's permission, his decision was final on whether they could stay, which would normally cost them something, or even be forced to leave upon threat of execution. Over time, many would pass through the wasteland and come upon the Republic of Dave, and soon, one of these would change this sovereign state completely. Having traversed the Capital Wasteland after leaving Vault 101, the lone wanderer came upon the gates of the Republic of Dave, and, as taught by the great leader, the people refused to speak to them properly until they had been granted permission by their president. After being led to the Republic's Capitol building, the president introduced himself as the leader of this great state and asked the Wastelander what they wanted from the Republic. Intrigued by this outsider, Dave offers them temporary citizenship of the Republic for a price, and from here, they learn all about the Republic of Dave. Having heard discussion of an election, the lone wanderer discovers that although the state practiced as a republic, no one actually ran against their president, as they believed he simply did a great job and did not need to be replaced. Dave's manipulative nature over the years had made it appear as though they had a choice in leadership, but his indoctrination since birth had brainwashed his constituents into believing that only he could rule them. Hoping to help Dave as a part of their nature, the lone wanderer is tasked by the president to get Shauna, Bob, Rosie and Jessica to vote, as they would normally leave it up until the last minute to cast them. Although Dave had, for some reason, placed trust in this outsider, he would not be sure of their nature until it was too late. As the lone wanderer spoke to each voter, they discussed the election and continued to learn how this republic worked. They would learn who each person would vote for, being Dave, and secondly, if they would in fact run themselves. Dave had informed the wanderer that if they were old enough to hold a weapon, they were old enough to run for president. This meant that Bob, Rosie, Shauna and Jessica could also run. Jessica believed that running against Dave would be a betrayal. Bob believed that he could be a better president, but only if given that slight push to run for leadership. Rosie was unsure on whether she could in fact run, and Shauna saw no flaws at all in Dave's running of the community and stated that she would vote for Dave twice if she could. Now, the lone wanderer, using their skills that they had picked up throughout their travels in the Capital Wasteland, could actually have an impact on the future of the Republic of Dave. As the population is asked by the lone wanderer to put in their votes, in one reality, they all vote for Dave, and so life goes on as normal for the Republic of Dave, where he rules those below him. It is unknown, as time passed, if his plans of expansion succeeded, but those below him would continue to follow his lead in anything he asked of them. In another version of reality, the lone wanderer convinces Bob to run against his father. Although the rest of the population would vote for Dave, the lone wanderer, in secret, would tamper with the ballot box and rig the vote in Bob's favor. On election day, Dave would discover his son had won the election and in anger, leave the Republic of Dave to start a new republic. After his father's departure, Bob speaks of his plans to rename the land in his name, throwing out the suggestions of Bobtopia and the Kingdom of Bob. While this change would be great for Bob, his dictatorship qualities would either make his kingdom stronger or leave it in ruins. In a final version of reality, the lone wanderer convinces Rosie to run against her husband. With her having already run a community larger than this one, as well as her kind nature, she could potentially make it a much better place to live. After rigging the vote, the lone wanderer would watch as Dave announces Rosie as the new ruler, and he would storm out, just as he had done when his son had won. In both realities where Dave had lost the election, Dave would leave his home to the winner where they would make these changes, and he would travel to the derelict town of Old Oni to attempt to form the new Republic of Dave. But this place had become overrun with deadly deathclaws. In Dave's absence from his office, the lone wanderer would gain access to his safe, where he would find the special key he had held onto since his mission in Fort Constantine and a unique hunting rifle, the All Painless, something the wanderer would use on their future adventures. On his arrival in Old Olney, Dave would fight against the Deathclaws in an attempt to claim the land for his new republic, but as much as he had talked up his abilities of combat, these claims were simply not true, and so he would die here, alone, while the old Republic of Dave would either thrive or fall under their new leadership. When traveling across the Capital Wasteland, most of the fun in this game is finding these types of locations that have such a great story that you can really get invested in. The Republic of Dave was one of those locations for me. At first, it simply appears as a small plot of land with a family living on it, but then you properly speak to Dave and learn it is a sovereign state. Amazing. This is almost a sad story. Even at this point of playing and researching, I do not know if Dave actually had the best intentions for his family on this land with his talk of expansion to help the lost souls of the Capital Wasteland, or whether he just wanted to keep his control. I guess his reaction when he does lose the election does say a lot about his character in this aspect. Regardless, you cannot convince me that this place was not the home of a cult, And Dave was the cult leader, even if those under him were unaware of it. It has all the characteristics of a cult. Just from a quick Google search, these characteristics of a cult fit perfectly well. A charismatic leader, yes. Indoctrination and brainwashing, yes. Absolute authoritarianism, yes. And unreasonable fear about the outside world, yes. These are just a few, but there are many more. Anyway, this is not a video about proving it is a cult. I just find it very interesting. This is something I did not really pick up on when I first visited the Republic, but it was pretty blatant when I came back to it. Regardless, the Republic of Dave is simply one of the many amazingly crafted locations in Fallout, and I plan to make many more videos looking at all of them. I feel bad for Dave having lost his home, that is, if he chose that outcome. But I also think that Rose taking over is the best choice, even if Bob isn't too happy about it. Let me know what you did. That was the story and lore behind the glorious Republic of Dave. If you enjoyed this episode, I would really appreciate it if you could leave a like and a comment on your thoughts. If you really liked it, then go ahead and subscribe. Interacting in any way will help the video with the algorithm gods. So give it a like, a dislike, and a share if you want to show somebody. If you would like to stay up to date with everything I do outside of YouTube and fancy some behind the scenes content, then go and follow my Twitter and Instagram. Finally, I would like to thank my patrons who are helping to support the channel. I really appreciate you. Thanks to the Old Gods, Talus, Detroit, Avi WV, Brunette Jonas, Jojo Scotia, Imaginary Holly, Ruben Mendoza, and Putpa. I would also like to give an extra special thank you to the Elder Ones tier, Jonas, Lewis, and Queen Arby. Thank you guys so much. What did you think of this lore? For me, as I have said many times at this point, the Republic of Dave was just a well-crafted location with a great story. That is, if you went through the dialogue options and searched for it. Oh, and Dave basically ran a cult. Did you like the Republic of Dave? Who did you let win the election? And do you think this place was a cult run by Dave? Let me know in the comments below. If you have any suggestions for future Fallout lore videos, please let me know. The next few I'm thinking about are Rivet City, the Institute, or maybe even Sanctuary Hills. That is, if there's enough information. That was everything I wanted to cover in this episode. Now, Wastelander, enjoy your day and remember to always store an extra stim pack. Bye.